Welcome to Nation. I'm Karen Pugliese. Now, there are two plans to fix the child welfare system sitting before the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal right now. One of them is from the feds, and the other is from the chiefs. Both groups say that their plan ends discrimination in the system, but the two plans are very different. That's what we're looking at today on Nation. But first, let's just back up a moment and take a look at how we got here. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found that Canada discriminated against First Nations children in the on-reserve child welfare system in 2016. The tribunal found that First Nations children in that system were more likely to end up in care and stay in care longer than children in the provincial system because the federal government so underfunded the system that children and families were not getting the same support. Over the years, the tribunal issued dozens of compliance orders, forcing Ottawa to increase funding, respond to emergencies, and reform parts of the system. There was supposed to be one national settlement, and a deal was put on the table in 2024. But only chiefs in Ontario accepted that deal. That one's going ahead. But that left the rest of the country without a solution, and talks broke down. So in August 2025, just last summer, the tribunal ordered Canada and chiefs to each come back with a plan. Let's take a look at the federal plan.
Every day that we continue, in this process is another day that a child is in care in a system that is not defined according to their culture, their identity, supported by their community. We have a mandate to fulfill. We have to meet that in a timely way.
Canada's plan offers $27 billion over 7 years, beginning in 2027. It's largely based on the deal that chiefs rejected last year, but with two key changes. First, Ottawa says it's now willing to negotiate region by region, or by treaty or tribal group, rather than one national deal. Second, it commits $4.4 million in annual funding after the initial 7-year period.
This funding represents long-term investments to support sustainable First Nations-led change for now and future generations. Most importantly, this approach would enable First Nations-led regional agreements across the country within a national strategy to support solutions designed by and for First Nations to keep children safe and connected to their families, cultures, and communities. The additional work that we have to do when children find themselves in care, one of the most vulnerable periods of their lives.
Money is not negotiable in the federal plan. It's based on formulas like population and remoteness. Now, if regions don't sign on, Ottawa says the plan will still move ahead next year. It just won't have regional customization. Now, there is a second plan before the tribunal, and it's called the Loving Justice Plan. And that plan was put forward by the National Chiefs Children's Committee and the Child and Family Caring Society. And they will be joining us in just a few minutes to talk about that after this break. Welcome back to Nation. I'm joined now by Cindy Blackstock, Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society, and Chief Pauline Frost, Chair of the National Chiefs Children's Commission. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So people are hearing a lot about child welfare right now. And one of the things is there is already an existing, what used to be Bill C-92, but an existing parliamentary act that gives First Nations control over child welfare agencies. What's before the tribunal is different. Can you just help us understand what the difference is between the law that was passed and what's happening at the tribunal?
Well, the law that was passed sets national minimum standards for the care of child and Indigenous children and families coming to the attention of child welfare. That could be a provincial agency, a First Nations agency, whatever. And it also provides a pathway for the affirmation of First Nations jurisdiction in child and family, albeit there is no funding requirement by the federal government to enable that First Nations lawmaking, which is one of the serious shortcomings of that legislation. What we're doing here is actually Canada was found to be discriminating against First Nations children and families who are coming to the attention of Child and Family Services and being serviced by First Nations by underfunding and actually really doing a lot of control that was very unhelpful for children. And that resulted in discrimination. And that came down as a legal decision against Canada back in 2016, actually on January 26th.
As the National Children's Chiefs Commission formally met in January, January of 2024. So we actually only had 1 year in which to get this work done. And it really came out of the Assembly of First Nations Chiefs and Assembly Resolutions 1661 that defines a new mandate going forward. So the rejection of the national framework or national plan, Family Children Services Plan, was intending for us to come together as regions from across the country. So we've had representation, commissioners across the country appointed by their chiefs, and taking leadership and meeting and trying to come up with a plan and working, of course, with Dr. Blackstock and her team. If you rejected a national framework, what does an alternative look like? And so we've been doing that work over many, many months, the course of 2024, 25, well, really just 25. And then in the time frame that we had from the Human Rights Tribunal and the last Chiefs and Assembly was to go ahead and start our consultation and engagement.
What are some other key differences in between your plan and Canada's plan that you think are like the most important thing?
Well, I don't see a clear indication from Canada that they accept that they're discriminating in real time right now, or even that that's what long-term reform means. I mean, long-term reform is about ending Canada's discrimination. And because they haven't fully come to terms with that, they don't see the necessity of having leadership appoint their own governance group who is going to oversee the department. They don't see the need for the tribunal to retain jurisdiction. They don't see the need for this child impact assessment. So that accountability stuff is really, really key. The second thing is that we see no evidence that they've really talked to children or young people. In our plan, we really went out and talked to young people and saw what they've seen. So every recommendation, you'll see a citation to a young person. The third thing is that we walk into the space with humility. We know that we had brilliant people contributing from all over the country for loving justice. We probably didn't get things right. So we've got actual mechanisms. So as Chief Frost is saying, is if something goes that creates discrimination, we get alerted to it at the earliest stage and we fix it. This isn't about being right. This is about doing the right thing for kids. And then I think the final thing is Canada, it throws money up in the air, big numbers in the air. What we're focused in is who governs it, how do we structure that money so that it makes the most difference for children, and then what do we do if results are not what we'd like to see, and hold people accountable.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, you did talk a little bit about the Human Rights Tribunal. Canada wants their agreement to end the involvement of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. Your agreement says they need to stick around for at least 5 years.
Yeah.
And why is that?
Well, because that's been the only thing that's really helped us get where we are today. Canada, for example, said it's absolutely impossible for us to fund capital for Child and Family Services until they were ordered to. They said it's absolutely impossible for us to continue funding different things at actuals until they were ordered to. It has taken legal orders to compel Canada. And what we're saying here is we would like, with Canada's agreement, to structure an ADR with the chiefs that is a good one, that keeps most of the disputes out of the tribunal. But that depends on Canada acting in good faith, not the kicking and screaming and we still want to control everything narrative that we've seen too often from the department. That will require that. I think it's really, really essential. And the other thing, Karen, that often goes under the radar, not only do they want the tribunal's jurisdiction to end, because in my view, they don't want that accountability, they want the legal orders of the tribunal to go away. And my question is, what are the implications of that? We worked on direction of the chiefs for 9 years before we ever got the decision that said they were discriminating. Do they want to get rid of that order? What happens if they get rid of the order that found the discrimination? Like, these are the things we need to really look at, and that leadership and our experts in the regions, as they explore Canada's plan, need to pay a lot of attention to.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up. Okay, so I want to get a little bit into what's in the plan. Now, one of the things that I noticed is that there's really a difference in funding. The federal government has said 27 billion over 7 years, starting in 2027, and after that, 4.4 billion. Your plan kind of works a little bit differently. It says funding should cover actual costs, and you kind of figure it out after. Can you?
Well, it's not quite that, but what we're saying is we actually don't know where Canada comes up with this number of 27 billion. Their plan makes some oblique references, vague references to data, but they haven't shown us how they came up with this number. We'd be very interested in knowing more about that. What we can say is we've agreed that there are publicly costed solutions that were researched based on First Nations data. And that should be used as a basis. But we also know, as Chief Frost is talking about, there are needs out there that we actually don't know what it costs, and Canada doesn't either. Things like post-majority care for youth who are leaving the care system. We don't know how much that costs. So the responsible thing to do is fund that at the actual cost over a period of time with First Nations oversight to make sure it's done properly. And then once we have a financial track record, we actually cost that out. So
How does the government plan to fund something, though, if it doesn't know what it costs? Like, what does that?
Well, that's the major problem. That's one of the key differences.
That's something we are trying to understand. I don't think Canada has submitted, they haven't submitted a formal plan to define the principles of negotiations or a framework, right? Price, population, remoteness, unique circumstances, defined into regional variation. Well, what does that really mean? Because they haven't shared publicly with us. They've not engaged with us with respect to a model that their methodology. There's no methodology. It makes no sense to us. And that's what we have to try to understand, particularly if we want to remove and eliminate the discriminatory practices.
How would you set a strategy, like set a number, though, to like for the government to plan for it? Like, would you just like run it, or like, and then after you've run it for a while, you know what it costs? Like, I'm just trying to get at.
Let's think about Ontario for an example. If you think about children on reserve, what about the children off care, post-majority support? What about the families that are currently displaced from flooding and fires, and where are they? Children that are in care with agencies, with regional governments. We don't think about the children that are off reserve. We don't have that data. You know, there's data's held in various areas, right? Canada, regional, First Nations. Well, how do we compile that so that we can actually get down to the true numbers that's needed for, because how do you define formula?
Right. So I think what I'm hearing from you is that you can't put a number in because there's a whole process that you need to go through first.
That's the regional variation that each region will define, because the scope of practice will come from that region. It won't come from Canada's concept of using Indigenous data that they've collected over the course of the decades, right? Under the Indian Registry. That doesn't qualify.
Okay, there's a few things that I want to go in through quickly that I noticed in your plan that I think are interesting. Traditionally, on reserve child welfare, that's what we call the program because it's meant for children on reserve. And the government uses a definition, normally on reserve. You've broadened that. Can you tell me who your plan applies to?
Well, I mean, we are dealing with a general overarching objective, which is that all First Nations children matter. The way that the complaint was filed was an on-reserve piece, but things have changed since then. And I think realities have changed since then. So we're going to, hopefully Canada will, adopt a definition that really supports First Nations in supporting their kids wherever they go. But we recognize that the complaint does say on reserve for child family.
I mean, I saw in your plan that you're including things like families that are waiting for a house on reserve, families that may have had to move from reserve because school wasn't available or services weren't available.
You think about it from a human rights perspective, right? UNDRIP and, the laws as it applies. That's really important because it becomes a human right, an individual human right. You can't discriminate against children and families for circumstantial reasons.
Okay, so I mean, like there is so much in your plan, and I know we're not going to get through it all in this. We will have a piece on the web that spells out some of the other things. There is support for youth aging out, which you mentioned. There's differences in data and how it's collected. But we are going to come back after the break, and we're going to talk about some of the key differences in between what your plan and what Canada's plan is proposing. So stay tuned and join us. We are going to be back. Welcome back. I'm still here with Cindy Blackstock and Chief Pauline Frost. We've talked a little bit about what's in the First Nations plan that was presented to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, and now we're going to focus on what sets it apart from the federal government's proposal and why those differences matter for children. Welcome. Thank you for sticking with us. So the first thing that I kind of noticed between the plans is there's this kind of feels like there's a difference who's in charge. Canada's plan says Indigenous Services Canada is going to remain the lead department, while regional governance bodies that are established through negotiations will advise and oversee implementation. Now, your plan says something different. Tell us how your plan sets this up.
Well, I think that one of the major differences is that there is a very limited role for First Nations leadership in Canada's plan. It's more as if we go out and we'll engage with you on these very limited issues, and then we at the department make the final call. So we need multi-layered, enforceable accountability for Canada. In Loving Justice, there's enforceable minimum standards nationally, and then this ability for regional agreements that are true regional agreements that are First Nations led to sit on top of that. In Canada's plan, what they've done is they've set up different things that kind of have limited scope in terms of what they can order against the government. And there's not access to justice. So for example, in our plan, we want a First Nations litigation fund set up so that if a nation sees the discrimination is again happening to their children, they actually can access that fund to bring the case against Canada. Because Canada is totally funded by the Department of Justice, right, by the taxpayer. We want Canada's policies to go through a child impact assessment. Experts appointed by leadership, including young people with lived experience, who say this is what your policy is going to look like on the ground for kids and families, and publicly report on it on that. The Expert Advisory Committee, we want that committee to be public and independent and overseeing the department and trying to reform the department. There's all these multiple layers in ours. When you look at that and compare it to Canada's, Canada comes out weak. And the other thing that Canada wants to do, of course, is get rid of the tribunal and get rid of all the tribunal's orders. And that is something we have to pay a very close eye on.
I'm going to talk about the tribunal in a minute. I just want to ask Chief Frost about the governance on this, because it seems to me that you've created a body in your plan that is funded by the federal government. It's required to be funded by the federal government. They can't stop funding it. And it gets to actually order ISK around a bit.
Well, I think that's the objective, right? It's really about transparency. We're trying to create an anti-organization that is, or an oversight body that is incorporating perspectives across the country and views that is reflective, but also doing the check-ins. If you are off track, when are you off track? Where do we look for improvement, significant improvements? We have never done that. Right now, the system that's being proposed is not fair. It's not transparent. It's still controlled by Canada.
Okay, so what happens next?
Well, we've got some indication of that. We're both kind of waiting. We are doing some of the things in real time. The tribunal has set down a case conference. It has received both plans. It's going to determine what process comes next. So that'll happen in January 21st, and there will be a public review after that. But we're continuing to work right now. National Children's Chiefs Commission and the Caring Society and AFN, we're meeting this week. And we're going to continue working on getting the best plan and implementing that plan for kids.
Well, I would say that, in terms of what's next, to Cindy's, Dr. Blackstock's point, we will continue this work. We're not stopping because we've submitted our framework. We have to continue and be prepared for the Human Rights Tribunal's outcomes. And obviously, they're going to make a determination on the best approach forward with respect to the submissions, right? And so how do we react to that? Well, we want to be ahead of the game, just like we were ahead of the game when they came out with the ruling to define and come with the framework that's going to address the core input from across the country. Well, we've been at that for a year. It did not just materialize overnight. It just meant that pulling it together in the last 3 months was really critical to December 22nd. But the work has commenced over the year, and we will continue on. And that's part of our week here, is really just analyzing what's in front of us, right, and helping and assisting the nations across the country, right, to implement, always contemplating that the regional variations, the concept of a variation, that the regions have to be prepared for that as well, given the outcomes.
So, and I just want to know, what does the tribunal think it's doing? Because this is the part that maybe I'm confused about. Are they going to pick one plan or another? Like, they asked for these two plans. What are they thinking is going to come out of this?
Well, the tribunal's mandate is to permanently end Canada's discrimination. And as you would in a court, you're going to present your plan and their plan. And the tribunal could say, well, loving justice all day long. That's the way we feel about it. Is the better plan. That's the First Nations plan, named in honor, by the way, of the teachings of Elmer Cushing. Or they could say there's parts of Canada's plan that have merits. They could order us to, do some exchanges of submissions on each other's plans. All of these things, but the end goal the tribunal has to achieve is permanently ending Canada's discrimination of child and family. And also, we need to keep an eye on Jordan's principle. That still isn't resolved by the Loving Justice Plan. That's still work that we have to do here with the Commission.
Oh yeah, and I'm going to be following that story too. So
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Karen.
Thank you for having us.
I just want to hold something up here.
Oh, yeah.
And this is the cover. It's like a heart, and it says "We love you" in all the Indigenous languages, which I thought was pretty special.
And Canada's doesn't have a heart.
Okay, we're out of time. Listen, these are comprehensive plans, and we did not get to everything today as hard as we tried. So you can go to our website and find more detail on both plans. And if you missed any part of the show, well, you can catch it on YouTube, and it's also a podcast, which you can find on aptnnews.ca/podcast or on your favorite app. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you next week.